What if the person everyone pitied was secretly standing at the edge of a future no one could imagine? 3 days. That was all it had been since Michael Sterling walked out of Vanessa Sterling's life. 3 days since one of New York's most celebrated billionaires ended a marriage that had lasted more than a decade. 3 days since reporters began speculating, socialites began whispering, and strangers on the internet decided they already knew the whole story. According to the headlines, Michael Sterling was moving forward while Vanessa was being left behind. According to the rumors, she was simply another ex-wife whose chapter had come to an end. And according to almost everyone who watched the drama unfold, her best days were already over. On a gray autumn morning, Vanessa stood alone by the window of the townhouse she had not yet decided whether to leave. The city moved as it always had beyond the glass. Yellow taxis flowed through the streets. Office workers hurried along the sidewalks. The world continued without pause. Yet everything inside her life felt strangely still. The silence was the hardest part. During the first day after Michael left, her phone had been overwhelmed with messages. Some people claimed they wanted to help. Others only wanted information. A few pretended to care while secretly searching for details they could pass to someone else. By the second day, most of those messages had stopped. By the third day, the attention had already begun shifting back toward Michael and his latest business triumph. Vanessa should have been angry. She should have been devastated. At least that was what everyone expected. Instead, she felt something much harder to explain. She felt exhausted. Not because of the separation itself, but because she had spent years watching people misunderstand her. They saw Michael standing on magazine covers. They saw him giving speeches, ringing stock exchange bells, and appearing beside world leaders. They saw the billionaire. What they never saw were the long nights before success arrived. They never saw the sacrifices made behind closed doors. They never saw the countless moments that could never fit inside a newspaper headline. Vanessa turned away from the window and walked slowly through the quiet house. Every room contained memories. The dining room where they once celebrated their first profitable year. The library where Michael had spent endless evenings planning expansions. The kitchen where they had shared takeout meals while discussing dreams that seemed impossible at the time. Those memories felt distant now, like scenes from another life. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone vibrating on a nearby table. She glanced toward it. An unknown number appeared on the screen. Vanessa hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said softly. There was no response. Only silence. A few seconds later, the line disconnected. She frowned and placed the phone back down. Wrong number, she assumed. Yet less than an hour later, another call arrived from a different unfamiliar number. Again she answered. Again there was silence. Again the call ended without explanation. By late afternoon, it happened a third time. Vanessa began to feel uneasy. The calls did not seem random. They felt intentional. Almost as if someone was trying to reach her, but could not find the courage to speak. Outside, rain clouds gathered over Manhattan. The first drops tapped gently against the windows as evening approached. Vanessa sat alone in the living room, watching the storm slowly arrive. Her phone rested beside her. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the screen illuminated once more. Another unknown number. Another unexpected call. Vanessa stared at it as it rang. Something deep inside told her to answer. Something even deeper told her that whatever was coming next had the power to change everything. She picked up the phone, took a steady breath, and pressed accept as thunder rolled across the city beyond the glass. Sometimes the most important phone call in a person's life begins with silence. Vanessa held the phone against her ear as thunder echoed across Manhattan. For a moment, she heard nothing except the faint sound of breathing on the other end. Then a calm male voice finally spoke. "Mrs. Sterling?" The question immediately sent a chill through her. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "Who is this?" There was a brief pause. "My name is Richard Holloway. I represent Holloway and Finch Private Legal Services. We have been trying to reach you for the past 3 days." Vanessa sat upright. The mysterious call suddenly made sense. "What is this regarding?" she asked. Once again, silence lingered before the man replied. "Unfortunately, I cannot discuss details over the phone. We need to meet with you in person." Vanessa frowned. The request felt strange. "What kind of meeting?" she asked. "A matter involving a recently deceased client." The words immediately made her uncomfortable. She searched her memory but could not think of anyone connected to her who had recently passed away. "I think there must be some mistake," she said. "I don't know anyone who would require legal representation involving me." Richard's voice remained professional. "We understand why this may seem confusing. However, there is no mistake. You were specifically named." Vanessa's heart skipped a beat. Named. The word repeated itself in her mind. Named by whom? Before she could ask another question, the attorney continued. "We would like to arrange transportation tomorrow morning. A representative will bring you to a private gathering. Attendance is extremely important." Vanessa stared out at the rain-covered windows. Every instinct told her something unusual was happening, yet she could not understand why she would be involved. "Can you at least tell me whose estate this concerns?" she asked. The attorney hesitated. "That information will be provided at the gathering." The answer only deepened the mystery. After ending the call, Vanessa remained motionless on the sofa. The storm outside intensified while questions raced through her mind. She had spent the last 3 days trying to understand how her life had fallen apart so quickly. Now, suddenly, something entirely unexpected had entered the picture. She barely slept that night. Each time she closed her eyes, she imagined different possibilities. Maybe the lawyers had contacted the wrong person. Maybe someone from her distant past had mentioned her name in a document. Maybe it was nothing important at all. But deep down, she knew none of those explanations felt right. The following morning arrived cold and gray. At exactly 8 o'clock, a black luxury sedan stopped in front of her townhouse. Vanessa almost declined the invitation. Yet curiosity proved stronger than fear. She stepped outside and entered the waiting vehicle. The driver greeted her politely, but offered no information. As the car moved through the city, Vanessa noticed something unusual. They were not heading toward downtown Manhattan. They were traveling north. Nearly an hour later, the skyline had disappeared behind them. The vehicle eventually turned through the gates of a massive private estate hidden behind tall trees and stone walls. Vanessa stared through the window in disbelief. She had never seen the property before. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway. Security personnel stood near every entrance. Men and women dressed in expensive suits moved through the grounds with quiet urgency. Whoever owned this estate had clearly been one of the most powerful people in the country. The driver opened her door. "We're here, Mrs. Sterling." Vanessa stepped out slowly. Before her stood an enormous mansion overlooking a lake. It looked less like a home and more like the headquarters of a private empire. As she approached the entrance, she noticed dozens of unfamiliar faces. CEOs, investors, attorneys, financial executives, people whose photographs regularly appeared in business magazines. Yet despite the crowd, an unsettling atmosphere hung over the estate. No one seemed relaxed. No one seemed comfortable. It felt as though everyone was waiting for something. Or someone. Then Vanessa heard 2 executives whispering nearby. "Can you believe she actually came?" one of them murmured. "She has no idea, does she?" the other replied quietly. Vanessa stopped walking. The words struck her immediately. They were talking about her. Before she could process what she had heard, the massive front doors opened. A senior attorney stepped forward and looked directly at her. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, "thank you for coming. The reading of the will is about to begin. How do you react when an entire room seems to know a secret about your life that you have never heard yourself?" Vanessa followed the attorney through the grand entrance of the mansion, her footsteps echoing softly across polished marble floors. The building was even more impressive inside than it had appeared from the outside. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Priceless artwork covered the walls. Every detail reflected unimaginable wealth. Yet despite the luxury surrounding her, the atmosphere felt strangely tense. Nobody was smiling. Nobody was casually networking. The dozens of influential guests gathered inside spoke only in hushed voices. It felt less like a social gathering and more like the moments before a verdict. The attorney guided Vanessa into an enormous conference hall overlooking the lake. Long rows of chairs faced a raised platform at the front of the room. As she entered, conversations immediately quieted. Heads turned. Eyes followed her movement. Vanessa suddenly became aware that she was the center of attention. She recognized several faces from financial news programs. There were CEOs whose companies controlled billions of dollars, hedge fund managers, international investors, senior executives from corporations operating on multiple continents. None of them should have known who she was. Yet somehow every person in the room seemed to recognize her immediately. The attorney led her toward a reserved seat near the front. A small nameplate rested on the table. Vanessa Sterling. Her pulse quickened. This had been planned. Whoever organized the gathering had expected her to be there. She sat down slowly, still unable to understand why. Minutes later, an elderly man stepped onto the stage. The room instantly fell silent. He appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and an air of authority that commanded attention without effort. "Good morning," he began. "My name is Charles Whitmore. I serve as senior executor of the estate, whose final wishes bring us together today." The audience listened carefully. No one interrupted. No one moved. Charles opened a thick folder resting on the podium. "Before proceeding, I wish to acknowledge that many individuals in this room have traveled from around the world to attend." Vanessa glanced around. That statement only increased her confusion. What kind of person could gather so many powerful figures in one place? Charles continued. "The individual whose estate we are discussing spent decades building one of the largest private business empires in modern history." A quiet murmur spread through the audience. Vanessa noticed several executives exchange nervous looks. His investments influenced industries across finance, technology, energy, transportation, and global infrastructure. The room grew even quieter. Whatever empire this man had built, it was clearly enormous. Then Charles paused. "Many of you spent years competing for his attention." Another pause. "Some of you spent years hoping to inherit a portion of his legacy." Several people visibly shifted in their seats. Vanessa sensed growing tension among the audience. "Unfortunately," Charles said calmly, "most of those expectations will not be fulfilled." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to touch. Vanessa frowned. The gathering no longer felt like a routine legal proceeding. It felt like something far more significant. Charles turned a page in the folder. "Before we address the estate itself, there is one matter that must be clarified." He adjusted his glasses and looked directly toward Vanessa. For a moment, she wondered if she was imagining it. Then she realized every person in the room was looking at her as well. Her stomach tightened. "The individual whose will is being read today left behind specific instructions regarding one particular beneficiary." The room became completely still. Vanessa could hear nothing except the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the hall. Charles lowered his eyes to the document. "He instructed us that this beneficiary must be present before any details could be disclosed." Vanessa felt her heartbeat accelerating. None of this made sense. She had never met the man being discussed. At least she did not think she had. Charles slowly raised his head once more. "Mrs. Vanessa Sterling," he said, "the instructions concern you." A wave of whispers immediately spread across the room. Shock appeared on faces throughout the audience. Some seemed surprised. Others seemed frustrated. A few looked almost angry. Vanessa sat frozen in place. "There must be some mistake," she said quietly. Charles shook his head. "There is no mistake." He opened another sealed document and carefully broke the wax seal. Then he looked directly at her again. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, "the man whose will we are reading today specifically requested that you hear his final message before anyone learns the contents of his estate." Why would a man powerful enough to control entire industries leave his final message to a woman he had never met? The question echoed through Vanessa's mind as the room remained frozen in silence. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on her. She could feel the weight of their curiosity, their confusion, and in some cases, their resentment. Whatever was about to happen, many people in this room clearly believed it should have involved them instead. Charles Whitmore carefully unfolded the document resting before him. The paper appeared old, as though it had been prepared long before the man's death. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. "If Vanessa Sterling is hearing these words, then I am no longer alive." The room became so quiet that even the soft rustling of clothing seemed loud. Vanessa listened carefully. The voice was gone, yet somehow the words felt personal. "There will be many people in that room who believe they deserved my trust more than you." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Some will think you are unqualified. Others will think you are unprepared. A few will believe you do not belong there at all." Vanessa glanced around. Judging by the expressions surrounding her, the statement was absolutely correct. "Ignore them." Charles continued reading. "Most of them spent years trying to impress me. Very few ever understood what I valued." The tension in the room continued to grow. True character reveals itself when nobody is watching. True strength appears when no reward is guaranteed. And true loyalty is demonstrated long before success arrives. Vanessa felt a strange sensation in her chest. The words seemed directed, specifically at her. Yet she still had no idea why. Charles turned another page. For years, I observed people from a distance. I learned that money attracts attention but rarely reveals the truth about a person. The audience remained silent. That is why my final decision was never based on wealth, status, influence, or reputation. Another page turned. It was based on character. A murmur swept through the room. Vanessa could see several attendees exchanging concerned glances. Whatever they had expected from the will, it was clearly not unfolding the way they had hoped. Then Charles paused. For the first time, his expression became serious. The remainder of this message contains instructions regarding the estate. Every person in the room sat forward. Some appeared nervous. Others looked almost desperate. Years of anticipation seemed concentrated into this single moment. Charles read slowly. To the members of my board, my advisors, my business partners, and every individual gathered here today. He paused. You have all spent years speculating about who would inherit my empire. The room held its breath. Today, that question is answered. Vanessa suddenly became aware of her own heartbeat. After careful consideration, I have chosen a single successor. No one moved. No one spoke. Every asset under my direct control, every holding company, every investment vehicle, every controlling interest, every private trust. Charles stopped again. Even he appeared affected by what he was reading. Then came the sentence that changed everything. All of it shall pass to Vanessa Sterling. For a moment, nobody reacted. The words seemed too impossible for the room to process. Vanessa herself wondered if she had heard them correctly. Then the silence shattered. Gasps erupted across the hall. Chairs scraped against the floor. Multiple voices spoke at once. One executive stood up immediately. Another stared in disbelief. A woman near the back covered her mouth in shock. Vanessa sat completely motionless. Her mind struggled to comprehend what had just happened. There must be some mistake, someone shouted. That's impossible, another voice protested. Charles raised his hand for silence. It took nearly a minute before order returned. Then he looked directly at Vanessa. There is no mistake. He opened another folder and placed several documents on the podium. Mrs. Sterling, according to the final audited valuation completed before his death, the total combined value of the inherited estate exceeds $950 billion. The room fell silent once more. Not because they were calm, because they were stunned. Vanessa could barely breathe. $950 billion. The number felt unreal. Impossible. Beyond imagination. Yet as she looked around the room and saw the shock on every face, she realized something terrifying. This was not a misunderstanding. This was real. And in a single moment, her entire life had changed forever. How does a woman go from being abandoned by her husband to becoming one of the most powerful people on earth in a single afternoon? Vanessa Sterling was asking herself the same question. The conference room had descended into chaos. Executives who had spent decades building careers around the empire were suddenly arguing among themselves. Lawyers whispered urgently. Investors exchanged worried looks. Several board members appeared completely stunned. Yet through all the noise, Vanessa remained seated. She could barely process what she had just heard. $950 billion. The number repeated itself endlessly in her mind. It was not simply wealth. It was power on a scale that could influence governments, industries, and financial markets around the world. Charles Whitmore waited patiently for the room to settle before continuing. There is more. Those three words immediately silenced everyone. Charles opened another folder. The founder anticipated resistance to his decision. A few uncomfortable faces appeared around the room. As a result, he left detailed explanations regarding why Vanessa Sterling was selected. Vanessa looked up. For the first time since entering the estate, she felt something stronger than confusion. Curiosity. Charles continued reading. Many of you know me as a businessman. Some know me as a strategist. Others know me as a builder of companies. Very few know how carefully I studied people. The room listened. Several years ago, I witnessed an event that changed my understanding of success. Vanessa frowned. She had no idea where this was going. A young woman entered one of my buildings. Nobody recognized her. Nobody knew who she was. Nobody realized I was watching. Charles paused. What happened next revealed more about character than any financial statement ever could. Vanessa felt a strange chill. That woman was Vanessa Sterling. A wave of surprise swept through the audience. Vanessa herself looked completely bewildered. Charles continued. At the time, she believed she was helping a stranger, an elderly man sitting alone. Vanessa suddenly froze. A memory surfaced. Years ago, before Michael became a billionaire, before the luxury penthouses, before the private jets, before any of it, she had encountered an older man sitting alone in a hospital waiting room. He looked tired, lonely, forgotten. She remembered bringing him coffee, sitting with him, talking for nearly an hour while waiting for her own appointment. She had never learned his name. She asked for nothing. Charles read. No recognition, no reward, no advantage. Vanessa stared at him. She returned several times during the following months. Not because she needed something, because she believed nobody should be alone. The room remained silent. During one difficult period in my life, when my own family had abandoned me and my health was deteriorating, Vanessa Sterling treated me with more kindness than people who stood to inherit billions from me. Several executives lowered their eyes. Charles continued. She never knew who I was. She never asked. She simply chose compassion when there was nothing to gain. Vanessa felt tears forming. The memory was becoming clearer now. The elderly man had spoken often about disappointment, about loneliness, about trust. She had assumed he was simply a retired grandfather with no one to talk to. Over the years, Charles continued, I quietly followed her life. The room became tense again. I watched her support her husband when he had nothing. I watched her sacrifice opportunities for his success. I watched her remain loyal through hardship. Vanessa could barely breathe. And recently, Charles read, I watched her lose everything. Silence filled the hall. The world saw a woman abandoned. Another page turned. I saw the person most worthy of carrying my legacy. Vanessa lowered her head. Across the room, powerful men and women who had spent decades chasing wealth now sat speechless. Then Charles delivered the final sentence of the founder's explanation. Empires built on money eventually disappear. Empires built on character survive forever. The room remained silent. But the story was not over. Because at that exact moment, one of the attorneys rushed into the conference hall carrying an urgent message. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. And the words that came out of his mouth would change everything again. We have a problem, he said. Michael Sterling just arrived at the front gate. What would a billionaire do if he discovered that the woman he had abandoned had become far more powerful than he ever imagined? Nobody in the conference hall knew the answer. Not yet. The moment the attorney announced Michael Sterling's arrival, a wave of tension swept through the room. Vanessa slowly lifted her head. For the first time since hearing about the inheritance, her thoughts shifted away from the empire. Michael. 3 days earlier, he had walked away from their marriage as though she no longer mattered. 3 days earlier, he believed he controlled the future. Now he was standing outside the gates of a $950 billion empire that belonged to her. Charles Whitmore exchanged a glance with several attorneys. How did he find out? One board member asked. News travels quickly when this much money is involved, another replied. Outside, black luxury vehicles rolled through the estate entrance. Security personnel moved into position. Inside the hall, nervous whispers spread from row to row. Everyone knew Michael Sterling. He was wealthy, influential, powerful. But compared to the inheritance Vanessa had just received, even Michael's fortune seemed small. Several minutes later, the massive doors at the back of the hall opened. Michael entered. The room immediately fell silent. He looked confident at first. Expensive suit, perfect posture, the appearance of a man accustomed to controlling every situation. But that confidence began fading the moment he noticed the atmosphere inside the room. Hundreds of executives were staring at him, some with curiosity, some with amusement, some with pity. Michael's eyes finally found Vanessa. For a brief second, confusion crossed his face. She was seated at the front of the room beside the attorneys, beside the decision-makers, beside the people who controlled the empire. Not among the spectators, not hidden in the back, at the center. Vanessa, he asked quietly. She said nothing. Charles Whitmore stood. Mr. Sterling. Michael approached cautiously. I received several calls telling me there was some kind of mistake involving my wife. The room reacted immediately. Wife. The word sounded strange now. Michael had not yet realized how much had changed. Charles folded his hands. There is no mistake. Michael frowned. Then explain why everyone is looking at her. Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one elderly board member leaned back in his chair. Because she owns this company. Michael laughed. A short, nervous laugh. The kind people make when something sounds impossible. That's not funny. Nobody laughed with him. Slowly, the smile disappeared from his face. He looked toward Charles. What does he mean? Charles opened the inheritance documents and placed them on the table. The founder selected Vanessa Sterling as sole successor. Michael stared at him. Successor to what? The silence that followed felt endless. Then Charles answered. Everything. Michael blinked. Everything. Every controlling interest. Every subsidiary. Every trust. Every private holding. Michael's expression changed completely. The color drained from his face. No, the word escaped almost as a whisper. That's impossible. Charles calmly slid the valuation report across the table. The estate exceeds $950 billion. The room watched as Michael stared at the number. Vanessa could almost see the moment reality hit him. The moment he understood. 3 days ago, he had left a woman he believed had nothing. 3 days later, she had become one of the wealthiest individuals in the world. Michael looked toward Vanessa again. This time there was no confidence in his eyes. No superiority. No certainty. Only disbelief. Vanessa, he said softly. I didn't know. Vanessa finally spoke. Her voice was calm. Steady. Stronger than it had been in years. No, Michael. She met his eyes without hesitation. You never bothered to know. The room remained silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. Because for the first time, they were witnessing something greater than an inheritance. They were witnessing the complete reversal of power. And as Michael stood frozen before the woman he had underestimated, another attorney hurried toward Charles carrying a sealed envelope marked with the founder's personal insignia. Charles examined it carefully. Then he looked directly at Vanessa. His expression turned serious. Mrs. Sterling, he said, there is one final secret the founder ordered us to reveal only after Michael Sterling arrived. What final secret could be powerful enough to silence a room already stunned by a $950 billion inheritance? The question hung in the air as Charles Whitmore carefully broke the seal on the envelope. Every eye in the conference hall remained fixed on him. Vanessa sat motionless. Michael stood frozen only a few feet away. The board members leaned forward in anticipation. Even the executives who had spent decades helping build the empire seemed nervous. Charles unfolded a single handwritten letter. The moment he recognized the signature, his expression changed. This message, he said quietly, was written personally by the founder less than 2 weeks before his death. The room fell completely silent. Charles began reading. If you are hearing this, then Vanessa Sterling has already inherited my empire. And if Michael Sterling is present, then the time has come to reveal the truth I kept hidden for years. Michael's face tightened immediately. Vanessa felt her pulse quicken. Charles continued. Many people will believe I chose Vanessa because she showed kindness to a lonely old man. That is true, but it is not the entire truth. Confused whispers spread throughout the room. Charles raised his voice slightly. Nearly 12 years ago, I hired a private team to observe hundreds of young entrepreneurs. I was searching for future leaders. Not executives. Not billionaires. Leaders. Michael's eyes narrowed. One of the people I observed was Michael Sterling. The room instantly turned toward him. Charles continued reading. At first, Michael impressed me. Ambitious. Intelligent. Determined. But over time I noticed something else. Every major success in his life seemed connected to one person. Vanessa's breath caught. That person was Vanessa. Michael looked away. Whenever Michael faced failure, Vanessa carried the burden. Whenever he lacked confidence, Vanessa restored it. Whenever opportunities appeared, Vanessa sacrificed her own future to help him pursue them. The room remained silent as the words echoed through the hall. I came to a realization. Michael Sterling was talented, but Vanessa Sterling was the reason his talent survived long enough to succeed. Several executives exchanged stunned glances. The founder's letter continued. Years later, after Michael became wealthy, I continued watching. What I witnessed disappointed me more than any business failure ever could. Michael lowered his eyes. I watched a man forget the person who built the foundation beneath him. Vanessa felt the weight of every sacrifice she had ever made. The sleepless nights, The extra jobs. The years spent believing in someone else's dream. Charles continued reading. For years, Michael believed he built his empire alone. He did not. The strongest investment of his life was standing beside him every day, and he abandoned it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Michael appeared unable to look at anyone. Then Charles reached the final page. His voice grew even more serious. There is one final instruction. The room held its breath. As sole owner of the empire, Vanessa Sterling has immediate authority over all leadership positions, all board appointments, and all executive contracts. Several board members nodded respectfully. But Charles was not finished, including any future business relationships involving Michael Sterling. The room erupted into shocked murmurs. Michael looked up immediately. What does that mean? Charles folded the letter. It means every pending acquisition, partnership, investment agreement, and financing request involving your companies now requires approval from Vanessa Sterling. Michael's face went pale. His largest expansion project depended on financing from institutions connected to this empire. Vanessa understood instantly. For years, Michael had possessed the power to determine her future. Now the situation had completely reversed. Michael turned toward her. There was no arrogance left. No superiority. Only desperation beginning to emerge behind his eyes. Vanessa, he said quietly. Can we talk? Vanessa looked at him for several seconds. The man standing before her barely resembled the confident billionaire who had walked away 3 days earlier. But before she could answer, another board member suddenly stood. Mrs. Sterling, he said, there is something you need to see before making any decisions regarding Mr. Sterling. He placed a confidential file on the table. Across the front were the words, Internal Investigation. Vanessa slowly opened the folder. Within seconds, her expression changed. Because the documents revealed a secret about Michael's business empire that nobody in the room had expected to discover. What secret could be hidden inside a file powerful enough to shake a room that had already witnessed a $950 billion inheritance? Vanessa stared at the documents spread across the table. The first few pages appeared ordinary. Financial reports, corporate filings, internal audits. Then she reached the section marked confidential. Her eyes narrowed. Michael immediately noticed the change in her expression. What is it? He asked. Vanessa did not answer. She continued reading. Across the room, silence grew heavier with every passing second. Finally, Charles Whitmore stepped closer. Mrs. Sterling? Slowly, Vanessa lifted her head. These reports were never made public. Charles nodded. Only a handful of people knew. They existed. Michael's face tightened. What reports? One of the board members spoke. Several years ago, the founder quietly ordered an independent review of major companies connected to his investment network. Michael suddenly looked uneasy. Vanessa returned her attention to the documents. The investigation revealed something unexpected. Michael's business empire was not failing. It was surviving. There was a difference. For years, financial media had celebrated Michael as a visionary leader. Investors praised his instincts. Business magazines called him a genius. But the confidential reports told a different story. Again and again, major financial setbacks had nearly destroyed his companies. Again and again, outside support had quietly rescued them. Vanessa felt her stomach tighten as she continued reading. Hidden emergency financing, unpublicized debt restructurings, private interventions from investors connected to the founder. Every time Michael approached disaster, someone behind the scenes had helped stabilize the situation. Someone had been protecting him. Michael stared across the table. That's not true. But his voice lacked conviction. Charles opened another folder. Unfortunately, it is. He placed several documents in front of Michael. These transactions are fully documented. Michael examined the pages. His face gradually lost color. No one word. Barely audible. Vanessa suddenly understood why the founder had included this revelation. It was not intended to humiliate Michael. It was intended to expose an illusion. The illusion that he had reached the top entirely alone. Charles continued. The founder became concerned after observing your treatment of Vanessa. Michael remained silent. He wanted to know whether your success came from exceptional leadership or from the support systems around you. The room listened carefully. The investigation revealed that many of your greatest achievements occurred because other people repeatedly stepped in to prevent catastrophic failures. Vanessa glanced toward Michael. For the first time, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing money, fear of confronting the truth. Then Charles revealed the final finding. The founder instructed us to share one specific statistic. Every eye turned toward him. Over the last 10 years, Michael Sterling's companies received more indirect assistance from the founder's network than any other private business group in the country. The room erupted with stunned reactions. Michael closed his eyes. Vanessa remained silent. The founder had not only watched her sacrifices, he had also quietly protected the man she loved, protected him long enough to succeed, protected him long enough to become famous. And Michael never knew. Charles reached the final page. There is one last statement from the founder. The room settled once more. Charles read aloud. Success often creates a dangerous illusion. People begin believing they climbed the mountain alone. They forget the hands that lifted them. Vanessa felt emotion building inside her chest. Michael Sterling was given many opportunities. Vanessa Sterling created many of them. My network preserved many of them. Yet he convinced himself they were entirely his own. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The greatest danger facing any leader is not failure. It is forgetting the people who made success possible. Michael lowered his head. For the first time since arriving, he had no defense, no argument, no explanation, only silence. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, board members began standing from their seats. Not for Michael, for Vanessa. Executives, investors, directors, leaders who had spent decades building one of the largest business empires in history rose to their feet. The applause started slowly, then grew louder and louder, until the entire hall echoed with respect. Vanessa looked around in disbelief. They were not applauding her wealth. They were honoring her character, the very quality the founder valued above everything else. As the applause continued, Charles stepped forward one final time. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, "the board has one question." Vanessa turned toward him. Charles smiled slightly. "Now that the empire belongs to you, what kind of future do you intend to build?" The question echoed through the hall. "Now that the empire belongs to you, what kind of future do you intend to build?" Hundreds of eyes turned toward Vanessa Sterling. Just days earlier, she had been the woman everyone pitied, the abandoned wife, the forgotten partner, the person people assumed had lost everything. Now she stood at the center of one of the largest inheritances in history. Yet the answer forming in her mind had nothing to do with power, nothing to do with revenge, nothing to do with proving anyone wrong. Vanessa slowly rose from her chair. The applause faded. Silence returned. She looked around the room filled with executives, investors, board members, and industry leaders. Then her gaze briefly settled on Michael. He remained seated, quiet, humbled, broken by truths he could no longer deny. Vanessa took a slow breath. "For years," she began, "people believed this empire was built by extraordinary intelligence." The room listened carefully. "But what I learned today is that empires are never built by one person." Several board members nodded. "They are built by loyalty, sacrifice, trust, opportunity, and people who choose to help others even when nobody is watching." The words felt larger than the room itself, because they were not only describing a business, they were describing a life. Vanessa continued. "The founder understood something many powerful people forget." She paused. "Success means very little if you lose your character while achieving it." A quiet wave of approval spread through the audience. "So my answer is simple." She looked directly at the board. "I want to build an empire that remembers people." Charles Whitmore smiled. Vanessa continued. "An empire that invests in potential instead of status. An empire that rewards integrity as much as performance. An empire where nobody is invisible simply because they lack money, influence, or connections." The room erupted into applause once again. This time it lasted even longer. Yet Vanessa barely heard it. Her thoughts had drifted elsewhere. To the elderly man who had once sat alone on a park bench. To the simple conversations they had shared. To the kindness she offered without expecting anything in return. That single choice had changed everything. When the applause finally faded, one of the board members stood. "Mrs. Sterling." Vanessa looked toward him. "On behalf of the entire board, we are honored to follow your leadership." Others quickly voiced their agreement. One after another, the decision was unanimous. Not because she was now the owner, but because she had earned their respect. Across the room, Michael slowly stood. The hall became quiet once more. Everyone knew he wanted to speak. Michael looked at Vanessa for a long moment. His confidence was gone. The arrogance that once defined him had disappeared. What remained was simply a man confronting the consequences of his choices. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "I spent years believing success belonged to me." His voice trembled slightly. "I thought I earned everything alone." He lowered his eyes. "I was wrong." Nobody interrupted. "I failed to appreciate the people who stood beside me." He swallowed hard. "Especially you." Vanessa listened without anger, without satisfaction, without bitterness. Michael continued, "I don't expect forgiveness." Another silence followed. "But I wanted you to know that I finally understand." For a moment neither spoke. Then Vanessa offered a small nod. Not a promise, not a reconciliation, simply acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of truth. Sometimes that was enough. Michael quietly left the hall. This time nobody followed him. Nobody applauded him. Nobody stopped him. Because the story was no longer about Michael Sterling. It never truly had been. The story belonged to Vanessa. Hours later, as the sun began setting beyond the estate, Vanessa stood alone near the window overlooking the vast grounds. Charles approached quietly. "The founder would have been proud," he said. Vanessa smiled softly. "I wish I could thank him." Charles handed her a small envelope. "Actually," he replied, "he left one final note." Vanessa carefully opened it. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. She read it once. Then again. Tears filled her eyes. The note said, "The greatest inheritance is not wealth. It is proving that kindness was right all along." Vanessa looked toward the horizon as golden sunlight filled the sky. 3 days after losing the life she thought she wanted, she had discovered the life she was meant to live. And for the first time in many years, she felt completely free. The end.